Well, thanks for the introduction. I actually can't juggle, but I can pronounce my name, which is Cerullo, which is an Italian name. Couldn't resist it. Sorry, Elliot. So really what I'm going to talk about today is something that I think, as Elliot said, is absolutely key to the future of Asia, which is around the talent agenda and actually bringing back the Asian diaspora. So those who are dispersed across the world. As a continent, we're a net loser of talent. You know, it's not just markets like the Philippines, which have chosen to export its talent around the world for a variety of roles. But across many of the developed and the emerging markets, we are losing that talent. So as organizations, what can we do to go back out and get this? Just in terms of why we're talking about this, AMS, or Alexander Mann Solutions, is a global talent management solutions business. We've got about 2,000 people across the world, headquartered in the UK, at about 320 are based in Asia Pacific. Across the world, about 50% of our people are based in global service centres, or client service centres as we call them. And even though we started in the world of RPO back in 1996 with our CEO, Rosaline Blair, in the UK, we've actually expanded our service propositions. We're working across that whole talent life cycle now, whether that's from an outsourcing, so recruitment process outsourcing, sourcing only, through to project support, specifically in Asia, and then on to consulting, whether that's touching on clients' employer brand or other of the thought leadership areas that Elliot mentioned earlier. And again, you can see our wide range of clients. And I think where this research that we conducted started to come from was a lot of conversations with clients, some of which are in the room today, in terms of, well, we just cannot find that talent locally. But we know that there are nationals overseas, maybe going to study in the US, in Europe, maybe they're looking at PhDs, but also people who've stayed overseas. And what can we do to bring those back to help with this talent challenge? I think there are some also interesting bits of research, which before Faye shows me her yellow card, I'll just brush over very quickly. Oxford Economics did a great piece of research which looked around the demand for talent across the region. And again, if you just look at that chart there, you can see emerging Asia over the next 5 to 10 years has the greatest demand for talent coming, unsurprising, but also developed Asia is way up there with the rest of the world. So we have this sense of demand. Going back about a year, a report from Boston Consulting Group was not just about the demand for talent and hence the shortages, but also the employability challenge. And in many senses in Asia and many of the markets that we're operating in, it's employability as much as shortage which causes this challenge. And again, thinking about internationally educated and international work experience, it's not going to solve all problems, but it gives us another talent pool to access. And again, coming back to Oxford Economics, you can really see here they've kind of done a green, amber, red approach to the mismatch between supply and demand. And even though they're stating, and I don't know, I'm not sure I necessarily agree with it in every sense, but some markets like Indonesia will have the strongest surplus of talent. So I think if you look at all of us and see the growth in Indonesia at the moment, I would debate that possibly. But I think what it does show in general, that mismatch between supply and demand is going to worsen over the next 10 years. So again, another part of our thinking behind this. What I think is a fantastic survey by PwC each year really reinforce this point about, the CEOs are more concerned in Asia than anywhere else they are around the world in terms of the availability of the key skills for the future. So, we're starting to see, and obviously not trying to set off on a negative note on the first morning of the HRO forum, but it sets a context around this challenge and what we can do about it. Now, we started to look at what's being done to source outside of Asia, and to be fair, not a massive amount really. And that was really reinforced by the recruitment business Manpower's survey in terms of looking at HR directors across the region and whether or not they were searching for talent outside of their country or their region. And you can see here that it was saying that 8% are searching outside my own country for talent, which is actually an extremely small audience when you think about the size of the organizations, but also the size of the challenge that we have in terms of recruiting talent. So what we did, and this is actually going to be launched next month formally, and there'll be a QR code for those of you with a smartphone to scan to access those results at a later stage, is we went out and surveyed 500 of the diaspora overseas asking them really, well, what is it about Asia? Why are you away? Why did you leave? Would you come back? Now, admittedly, 500 is a mere drop in the ocean in terms of the total population overseas, but it's a good indicative base. And we went for people with degree education. We targeted across multiple nationalities. So we feel, even though it's not a huge percentage of that pool overseas, it's a good, strong indicator and a representative sample. So just picking up on some of the research, I mean, unsurprisingly, people left to travel. They travelled for work experience or study. And actually on the back of that, then they're staying overseas. A much lower percentage were leaving due to financial reasons or for greater pay. I think that's one thing that's often coming first of mind. People are going overseas to get more money, not necessarily the case. So again, just a very brief touch on that. But what was interesting is getting on for 90% of this audience is willing to come home and wants to come home, which was actually a bit of coming back to Paul's question about light bulb moments. That's a huge potential pool to bring back. And we wanted to understand what are the key drivers there. And actually, unsurprisingly for this region, family is number one. And that sense of belonging, getting back to their home market, but also opportunities at home and giving that sense of career potential and so on. And when we started to look at what the opportunities are like, we wanted to do a bit of a comparison in terms of how they perceive their current location, whether that was US, Canada, Australia, UK, Germany, versus opportunities in Asia. And basically, this is better in Asia or worse in Asia. So this is all around perceptions rather than necessarily reality. But opportunities are seen as much greater. So hence we start to think about how do we get across the sense of opportunity to people. Interestingly, another part of the research, which we won't be sharing today, one of the biggest blockers is actually they think there are more opportunities, but they can never find them. And they find it very difficult to connect with organisations back in their own country. They find it very difficult to source information through careers websites. And Raquel from University yesterday, I know they've studied this with students and PhDs in the US and Europe, and that's exactly what's coming out, is the biggest blocker to returning home is having organisations reaching out to me. So again, opportunities better, others, not necessarily others. I don't know about having moved to Asia from Europe. I'm not sure whether I'd agree with the work-life balance comment. I know we work long hours here, but perhaps that's to do with global organisations. But I think the sense here is around opportunities and career development, how we can bring those to the potential target audience. We also want to look at how they're looking for work. And again, what we've started to do, and we haven't done it, as I said, this is fully out next month, is look at a comparator between the way people are looking for work overseas versus within the Asia-Pac marketplace. And unsurprisingly, digital led the way. So job boards, social networks, a much lower point on some of the other trends. So again, we started to want to look into those. And from a social media perspective, we asked all of the entrants to the survey to respond in terms of where they had a social media presence. And I think this starts to give us a big indication of the power of social media. If you look here that over 85% of them are on Facebook, you take that as a comparator in Singapore, 59% of Singaporeans are on Facebook, and Singapore's the market with the highest penetration on Facebook across Asia. So we've got a much more social audience overseas, which are much more findable through social media. Again, if you take it on LinkedIn, 65% on LinkedIn. In Singapore at the moment, it's 21%. As of a couple of weeks ago. So we have a very socially enabled and socially engaged audience. And again, from our research, we saw very, very little activity on social media from organisations reaching out to potential talent overseas and bringing them back to Asia. So just so I stay within my time limit, just to share some thoughts on steps to success. This isn't the magic formula. It's not going to suddenly solve this challenge, but just some things that we've been doing and thinking about, and going into as much detail as I can without breaking any confidentiality. I think the first point here is actually about compelling messaging. This word cloud is taken from some of the qualitative answers from the research survey. And I think this whole sense of getting out the proposition, defining it for returning Asians or Asian nationals, bringing that to life through various content, educating it to your colleagues in different markets to help them support you bring those people back. I mean, there's a lot of talk, and as Elliot mentioned, I've come from a branding background, about EVP, but I think a generic EVP globally just doesn't work in this sense. We have to target it to the audience segment and have to bring to life what the careers are like back in Asia. I think another side, and these are in no specific order, is think different about the way that you structure a recruitment team. I mean, in many senses and many organizations, no matter what we say, we work in silos across different markets. And I think this is really about challenging, if you want to bring the talent back, and that is a huge pool that's there, is think differently about where you locate your staff, think differently about the time zones they're working in. And a lot of the work we're doing with our clients now is driving a, not quite 24/7 chasing the sun, but a 24/5 mentality for sourcing candidates. So either locating sources overseas in the markets to bring talent back, or using our Manila service center to drive sourcing and market mapping and searching through social media such as LinkedIn and some of the others back in the US, but doing it in the time zone of the candidate rather than being constrained by the 1-2 hours we have crossover with different time zones. So I think just think differently about the way we structure our teams. And there's a couple of live examples there. I think it's also about education and information. You know, if you go to a lot of organizations, whether global or they're more regional businesses, the depth of content on a careers website about working within that country is actually very, very limited. There are a few companies that touch on it. Deutsche has some element on their website around the different markets. You know, for some of the big firms like Accenture, you can visit each of the countries. But again, it's not really thought about in terms of, well, if you want to come back to Asia. I think GE's done something quite nice on its website where it's integrated all the roles in one region rather than just in a specific country. So again, just think about how we get this information out. Think about, you know, reaching the audience and giving them a simple journey back into your organization. Social, and not just because I'm mildly obsessive, as Elliot knows, on social media, but I think social has to be the core to this in many senses, as well as the resources. You know, you can do some very complex Boolean search strings on LinkedIn to identify this talent. We're tending to use various techniques around that, which even though you can't search on LinkedIn by nationality, there are other methods you can do to actually find overseas nationals. But at a simple level on the right-hand side here, just using the targeted advertising tool on LinkedIn, I can look in 4 markets. I've identified 126,000 talent pool that I can then access who have language skills relevant to Asia. Now, it's a bit of a leap of faith to say, are these all nationals? Possibly not. Again, it gives me a sense of those. And you can see, I'm sorry, that 126,000 was just in the 35 to 54 bracket, and 12,000 over 55. Now, I know in many markets we can't talk about age, but LinkedIn does enable us to identify that. I think what we've also seen on LinkedIn, some organizations trying to create talent communities through groups. There's a couple of very small ones being launched on bringing talent back to Asia, so much more engaging. And then on Facebook, a very underutilized tool. We did a piece of research last year on social media in Asia. And whereas LinkedIn is in the 93% of usage by organizations across Asia, Facebook was close to 40%. And actually, in many senses, I'm a very strong supporter of both. I think Facebook provides us with the biggest opportunity to deliver very targeted messaging to people's news feeds. We've done that for the likes of Barclays. On top of the advertising, you can also go, there are groups online where you can build relationships with. I found a fantastic one, Singaporeans in Germany. I didn't even know there were any there. But again, it gives me a bit of a sense of accessing those. And again, you can find those groups through, it's much easier to find them through Google than it is through Facebook. I think also think about events. Now, there are some great government initiatives, Talent Corp in Malaysia, Contact Singapore, the Chinese government's launching a number of them. There was an interesting event in Beijing I know a couple of people in the room went to last year around bringing talent back to Asia or back to China. So you can get involved in those. There are also the public and the commercial events like Boston. So I don't know if any of you have been to the Disco Japanese companies events. They've now started that in Australia as well to bring talent back to Asia from Australia. They've got it in Boston. And companies like the Global Career Company. I think on other organisations, and sorry, Jez, I'm mentioning Deutsche Bank again, are actually going out and making specific roadshows. Often this is related to the graduate marketplace, so going out and building engagement programs with students from relevant countries. So again, while I'm heavily weighting this towards the digital landscape, you can actually do a lot more just by visiting and engaging with people. So just to finish on time, I think, just summarise on this, and as I say, there will be access to the full research at a later stage. That talent pool is there. You can access the size of the total talent pool through the likes of UNESCO. Again, as Elliot said, we've got stacks and stacks of data, and I didn't want to fill you with even more charts, but you can actually absolutely see it, and you can see the migration flows by country. It's always got a slight lag in time, but it gives you a chance, size of the opportunity. But just using some of the social media and checking these audiences out, again, it helps you identify. I think it's about education engagement. It's about addressing some of those perceptions, sometimes misperceptions, sometimes accurate. And it's about selling the proposition and bringing it to life to those potential audiences. But I don't think we can do it with a standard recruitment model where we're in country using our local channels. We need to leverage where we have colleagues globally. We need to restructure the teams to work in the relevant time zones. And we need to think differently about our techniques. We are, as a region, absolutely behind the US in using social media, although we're catching up very quickly, and I think we can push that much further. So, on time. Thank you very much. Are we doing questions now or later? Anyone got any questions? I'm surprised Mr. Arkwright hasn't. Oh.
I was just giving everybody else a chance.
3 questions today.
Oh, well, I'll limit this one then. No, just a very quickie. You mentioned that there are several sort of methods you can use on LinkedIn to find people of different nationalities. You mentioned one was looking for language skills. What are some other useful ones if we want to hone in on different nationalities?
I mean, unfortunately, none of it's foolproof because of the way that the LinkedIn profile's built, and it's not around nationality, it's around skill sets and functions. But looking at education backgrounds and doing, it's going to sound a little bit geeky, but deep Boolean search strings. So for those of you who don't know Boolean, it's a method of searching for web in databases, searching for information and sorting information. So doing that based around where people studied. Some of the universities they've been at is another way of doing that as well. Thank you very much.